Hey guys, welcome to another episode of T's Creative Ramblings, and today we're back with part 3 of building the army of Saruman. Now, if you haven't already watched parts 1 and 2, I would highly recommend going and watching them, because in part 1 I look at the figures that I'm using for this army and the actual sort of setup on the bases and basing the figures themselves. In part 2, I touched upon taking them essentially from a black primer state and then painting them up and getting them to the stage this week, where you will have already seen in the sort of preview part, I just finished off painting up the army ready for this week, which is of course the basing and the detail work, which is going to basically be putting a bunch of flags on these units. Now, it took me about another hour or so, probably about an hour and a quarter in total, to finish painting the units that I had left to paint. It did take quite some sort of feat of energy to actually finish these off. It is quite tedious. It's not like painting normal sort of 28mm or 20 or even 15mm figures, even 6mm for that matter. It is quite different and it can be very tedious at times, but I made it through. So I think what we'd best do now is head down to the workbench and let's look at basing these and also adding the flags. I should say before we go down to the workbench that I have also let these figures dry and then actually put a varnish over. I just use a spray varnish, but that will hopefully protect the figures from chipping and hopefully give them a bit of longevity. Anyway, enough of me rambling. Let's get down to the workbench. All right, guys, so here we have the army painted up and finished. I've gone over it, as I said in the intro, with a spray varnish. So hopefully these shouldn't be getting chipped anytime soon. So my next job is really to complete the bases, which is going to involve me taking some PVA glue and sort of brushing it on lightly where I want the turf. I'm not going to cover all of it because I want to ensure that some of the ground cover still sees through, much like you would see normally in battlefields and places like that. And then I'm going to use two different scatters to try to build up a little bit of colour and texture to the bases. So the first is this Woodland Scenics Fine Turf. This is the burnt grass version. And then I'm going to use Woodland Scenics Fine Turf green grass version. These cost me just short of £10 each for quite big containers. And these have been lasting me quite a long time, or they are lasting me a huge amount of time for the different projects that I'm doing. So that's what I'm going to use to do the scatter. I'm going to go ahead and do that in a time lapse now, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the flags. So back in a flash. Alright guys, so here we have the finished army in terms of the basing. As you can hopefully tell on camera, there is a variety in the tones within the sort of grass essentially, and that's what the burnt grass and the green grass gives you when you add the two together. Now, a couple of points to note. First, and on a quite a serious note, if you're whistling along to music, which I was, try not to whistle in the direction of the scatter because it will go everywhere. But seriously, guys, the piece of paper that I put down, and I did all of the scatter on, I glued on it and I scattered on it. The reason I do that is because after each scatter you've put down, you can shake off the excess and put it back into the tub, which means that you really don't waste much at all, and it keeps this working surface fairly clean. So that's one point to take. The other point that I wanted to raise was when I was putting the glue on the bases, I didn't put a lot on to start with. I'd much rather not put enough on and go back and add more, rather than putting too much on and then not being able to take it off. And when I was putting the scatter down, sometimes I was putting it down liberally, sometimes I wasn't. Now the advantages are that if you put too much down on the first coat, the second coat won't be as much, because essentially if the glue's already stuck something down, it's not going to be able to stick more down. You're not in a particular space. I'm burbling a bit here, but essentially what I'm saying is, if you're worried about not putting too much down, you can always come back and put a bit more on. If you've put some down in some spaces and you come back and then put the second lot on, obviously it will only fill the gaps that the first amount of scatter hasn't glued on. And if you've missed bits of glue, don't worry, because they will dry clear. So what will happen is you'll actually have some nice gaps in between the grass, and you'll get that sort of bare earth coming through. So don't panic too much. And as I was thinking, I'm not sure if I said it in the sort of last bit before the time lapse, but when you've painted your bases, if you've made some sort of pretty big areas, or even some minor areas, such as maybe a bit too much paint when you're dry brushing, you can cover up a multitude of sins with the basins. So here, there's a prime example. I actually over dry brushed here, too much paint over here and over here and just over here, and they've actually been fairly covered up by the scatter, which means that I have been able to sort of get away with one there, essentially. So the next thing I need to do, guys, is to put the flags on these. Now for this, I use florist wire. It's really thin. I don't know if you're going to be able to see that. It's really thin, but it is wire. It is fair. You can bend it quite easily. But the nice thing about this is if you cut it off in very small chunks, you can super glue it on and paint them brown and essentially have flagpoles. So I'm going to be adding, I'm not sure how many I'm going to add, because for every one that I add, I've then got to obviously make a flag for it. And there's quite a few bases here, which means quite a few flags. So I'm probably going to do one on the command base here. I'm probably then going to do maybe one base for each of the three types with some flags. But I do think actually all the bases would look good with flags on. So maybe I'll attempt to do 3 or 4 flags per base. It's quite a bit, but once I've done it and got them all the flags stuck down, which I'll be using just a scrap of paper to make those, then it is actually quite a quick process. It's a quick paint with black paint, and then I'll use some white over the top of the black to do the hand of Saruman. Saruman, yeah. I will be looking up to see if there's a flag for the Wild Men of Dunland, and I will also see if the Orcs had a different one, or whether they use the same flag as the Urukai. But either way, I think it will be worth the effort, because it will really make these bases pop, and you'll know exactly who these belong to. So that's the next part. I'm going to jump back into a time lapse and get this bit done. Oh, and one other thing I should mention, I do need to add smoke to this base here coming off, and I'll probably just use a little bit of cotton wool, some PVA or some tacky glue for that. And then I might add a little bit of watered down paint, or if I've got a bit of a wash, just to make it look like we've got some flames coming out at the source. But yeah, apart from that, we are almost done. So let's jump into that time lapse, and then I'll come and give you a close-up of what the armies look like. So here we go. All right, guys, so here we are. The force now has some detail, but it's not finished yet. I need to paint the flags. Now, I've got to a stage today where I've got to kind of stop. I've got other things I've got to go do. And to be fair, that's not a bad thing, because actually what I need these flags to do is to dry. Once they're dry, I can then put that black paint on. And to be fair, usually with the black paint, what I find, or with any of the paint when I'm painting flags, is if I've got quite a lot of flags to do, like I have here, once I've reached the last one, the first one will tend to be dry, but I will probably give it just half an hour between putting on the black coat and then putting on the white details, and I will put the white details on both sides. And I am going to do that as a time lapse, so don't panic, that's up next. But I just wanted to pause as I've sort of come to a good point, and I'm going to need to stop for today. I have essentially on each of the orc bases, I've put 3 flags, except for this unit, which has got 2. I figured they might actually be the lead one, but we'll see. And then all of the Urukai have 2 flags on each of their bases. The Wild Men of Dunlam didn't get any flags, and then I've just detailed up the battering ram doesn't have anything with its support crew. The chap with the flame that's going to set off the gunpowder, you can see he's smoking. And then the command team, what I've tried to do is give the impression that it's a double flag on a large pole. So what I'll probably do is paint a brown strip across the top to make it look like it's a pole, and then the bottom parts of the flags on the sides will be black. I did try to put a glue on a support beam across the top. It just didn't work. It's too small and too fiddly. But anyway, guys, I'm going to jump into a time lapse next, so that you can see me paint the flags, and then we'll come back for a final roundup and kind of call this army done. So let's roll that time lapse. So that completes this project. I have to say, it's taken me probably the best part of a month. I haven't been constantly working on it, but it's, you know, finding the time, then it's finding the motivation and the energy. But I've made it to the end. I'm really, really pleased. This is almost double the size of my Rohan army, so it's taken quite a feat of effort to get this all done. The flags have come out in a mix. Some look like dog paws. Some I've got 1 or 2 in there that actually look half decent. I have to say probably the best one was the very first one I did, which was this the command stand. I think that probably looks the best of all of them, so that's why I'll show you that, and I won't show you so many of the others. But from a distance, I think hopefully you can see it captures the feel of the army very quickly. You can see which units are part of the Saruman army and which units aren't, as in the Rohan, the armies of Rohan. So that absolutely brings this part of the project to a close. The only other thing that I need to do in this project is to finish off the terrain, which is something I'm sort of not looking overly forward to. I will chip away at it when I get that energy, but I don't want to force myself to do something at this stage, because ultimately if I get bored with it, I'll just put wargaming on the shelf again for another few months, and that won't get me anywhere. So I've got two projects in mind moving forward. Then one of them is to chip away at some other units for the Lord of the Rings, specifically some elephants. And if I just show you, a friend of mine, Phil, 3D printed me a bunch of elephants, which I think are going to be which will work absolutely brilliantly. If I can just bring that into focus. So I will need to clean them up and cut certain bits off. I need to work out which bits to cut off. And then I will put them on one of these bases. I'm thinking probably one of these, maybe a couple on that, or I could get 3 on a bigger base like this. I'll use some of these figures here and cut those up and put those around the elephants. And so I could probably do half a dozen bases of that with the amount I've got. Let's see, I've just got 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. So I've got 11, and I've got 3 dead ones, which I'll probably put on some smaller bases as just scatter terrain. So that's one thing, and those units will get added to this. I know that's not technically correct with the flags, but you know what, I can't really, I wanted the flags, but I can't be bothered to do a whole set, another army like this. I'd rather just add to this and add these guys in. But that's all working towards the Battle of Minas Tirith, or the Battle of Pelennor Fields, which is just outside Minas Tirith. So I want to kind of grow my armies of, well, it'll be now the armies of Mordor and Sauron for that particular battle. At some point I may well even build Minas Tirith, much like I did for Helm's Deep. So, you know, keep that in mind if you're thinking about subscribing to the channel. Those videos will be out in the future. The other project is one that I started a while ago, which is some buildings for 20 mil. They're sort of fairly generic, but ultimately the project that got me started on them was the Chechen Wars in the early 1990s, possibly late 1980s. But basically it's Russia versus Chechnya, and so I've got those buildings. I've already made a good start on them, but I'm thinking there might be quite a good topic for some more videos. And it's terrain rather than figures, so maybe people will like that as well. So a couple of options there, but I am intending to try and keep this Wargaming Thursday as a solid sort of item on my weekly schedule for the channel. So if you do like what I'm doing on Thursday, do please firstly watch it and put a like, subscribe, because all of that tells me that you guys are enjoying that and you want to see more of it. So that's it. I'm going to call this one good. So as I said, please hit that like button, please subscribe to the channel. It means a huge amount to me, and costs you absolutely nothing. And until next time, take care, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.